The sun had barely risen over the wide, endless plains when Maria lit the stove in the ranch kitchen, her hands moving with the rhythm of someone who had long mastered the art of feeding hungry men after dawn. She had been cooking for ranch hands for years, a quiet life filled with flour dust, sizzling bacon, and the low murmur of boots gathering near the long wooden tables. Yet that morning felt different, though she couldn't explain why. There was a stillness in the air, broken only by the sound of horses nickering in the distance. When the door swung open, a tall stranger stepped inside, dust clinging to his jacket and sunlight catching in his dark eyes. He looked too refined to be just another drifter, but Maria, busy stirring the pot, paid him no more attention than she would any other man. Still, something about the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his stride, made her heartbeat quicken, though she reminded herself he was just passing through like so many before him. The ranch hands greeted the stranger with nods, but there was a flicker of respect in their eyes, as though they sensed something different about him. Maria noticed how he didn't rush to sit or demand food. Instead, he helped another worker with his chair, thanked her softly when she placed a plate before him, and ate with quiet dignity. It was rare to find such manners among rough ranchmen, and though Maria had grown used to the gruffness of cowboys, she found herself glancing at him again and again. The stranger smiled once when he caught her gaze, and Maria quickly turned back to her skillet, cheeks burning. She scolded herself silently. She was just the cook after all, and he was probably just a traveler looking for work or a place to rest. But something in the way he looked at her, steady, warm, as if he saw beyond her apron and weary hands, stirred feelings she had long buried. Days passed, and the stranger did not leave. He worked alongside the ranch hands, fixing fences, tending horses, and sharing their labor without complaint. Yet he never boasted, never sought attention, and always treated Maria's meals with a kind of reverence that made her laugh inwardly. "It's just stew," she once teased when he complimented her cooking, but he shook his head and said, "It's more than that. It feels like home." Those words lingered with her long after the tables were cleared, making her wonder who he truly was. The men respected him, even looked to him at times when decisions needed making, though no one seemed to question it. Maria began to notice the way he walked the land, not as a hired hand, but as if it belonged to him. Still, she never asked, fearing to intrude on a mystery that both unsettled and enchanted her. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and painted the sky in hues of fire, Maria stepped outside for a breath of air. To her surprise, the stranger was already there, leaning against a post, watching the horizon with thoughtful eyes. For a long moment they stood in silence, the distance between them filled with unspoken words. Finally he asked softly, "Do you like it here?" Maria smiled faintly, saying the land was beautiful, but she admitted life could be lonely at times. He turned then, his gaze meeting hers with a depth that made her breath catch. "It doesn't have to be," he said quietly. The words were simple, yet they struck her heart with a force she didn't expect, leaving her wondering if he meant them for her or simply as a passing thought. Maria tried to push those feelings aside, throwing herself into work, yet every time the stranger entered the kitchen, her world seemed to shift. She noticed the little things, the way he always made sure the younger ranch hands got food first, the way he carried himself with pride, but never arrogance, and the way he spoke to her with a gentleness that made her feel seen. She had lived a life of service, hidden in the shadows of men's labor, but this man looked at her as though she was more than just a cook. Rumors began to spread among the hands. Some whispered he was a drifter with secrets, others said he was running from something. Maria wondered too, but her heart told her there was more to him, a truth he was holding close, waiting for the right moment to reveal. That moment came sooner than she expected. One stormy afternoon, the ranch owner was said to be arriving. A man no one had seen in months, a figure spoken of in hushed tones, for he rarely mingled with his workers. Maria was in the kitchen, preparing a feast worthy of such an arrival, when the stranger entered, his expression calm but resolute. The men gathered, waiting for the owner's carriage, but when none came, the stranger stepped forward, his voice carrying authority Maria had never heard before. "There's no carriage," he said. "There's no one else coming. The truth is, I am the owner of this land." Gasps rippled through the room as eyes turned to him in disbelief. Maria froze, the ladle trembling in her hand. The quiet stranger who had eaten her stew with gratitude, who had labored alongside the men, was the very man who owned it all. For a long moment, the room was silent, the ranch hands staring in shock, unsure whether to bow their heads or question his claim. But as the stranger, no, the owner, spoke, explaining that he had lived among them to understand their struggles, their respect turned to loyalty. Maria, however, felt her heart torn between awe and fear. She had spoken to him as an equal, teased him, even allowed herself to dream of him in quiet moments. But now he stood revealed, a man of wealth and power, so far above her station that the thought of anything more seemed impossible. She turned away, hiding her trembling hands, afraid that whatever bond they had was nothing but a fantasy. That night, she stayed late in the kitchen, scrubbing pots long after the others had gone, trying to steady the storm within her. But then the door opened and he entered, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Maria," he said gently, stepping closer, "I didn't mean to deceive you. I only wanted to be seen as a man, not just a name tied to land and money." She kept her eyes down, afraid to look at him, afraid of the longing she felt. "And what am I to you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He reached out, lifting her chin so their eyes met, and his answer came with the weight of truth. "You are the heart of this place. The land may be mine, but it's your laughter, your kindness, your strength that makes it home." Tears blurred Maria's vision as the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. For years she had believed her place in life was fixed, that love was a luxury for women born into softer worlds. Yet here stood a man who saw her worth beyond her apron and calloused hands. "I don't need riches," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to know I'm not dreaming." He smiled then, a smile that held no arrogance, only devotion. "You're not dreaming," he murmured, stepping closer, his hand brushing against hers with a tenderness that set her soul alight. In that moment, Maria knew the truth, that love had found her, not in the way she imagined, but in a form far greater than she ever dared hope. The weeks that followed were filled with changes, but none as profound as the quiet bond that blossomed between Maria and the man who once had been a stranger. The ranch hands accepted her as more than a cook, recognizing the light she brought to their owner's life. The land thrived under his leadership, but it was Maria's touch, her warmth, that made the house a home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed golden, he took her hand and led her outside, his eyes shining with certainty. "I came here looking for truth," he said, "and I found it in you. The land may be mine, but my heart belongs to you." And with those words, Maria's world shifted forever, not with riches or titles, but with the simple, powerful truth of love. The cook who once served men at long tables had unknowingly captured the heart of the man who owned it all. And together they built a life where both the land and their souls could flourish, as the truth of their bond spread quietly across the ranch. Maria found herself walking a path she never imagined, no longer just the cook in the kitchen, but the woman whose presence softened the heart of the man who owned the very soil beneath their feet. The ranch hands, at first surprised, soon accepted this shift with ease, for they had long noticed how his eyes followed her with warmth and how her meals brought him more joy than any banquet could. Maria, however, struggled to believe it fully. Each morning when she lit the stove and kneaded the dough, she wondered if it could all vanish like smoke, if she might wake one day to find him gone, leaving her with nothing but memories. But he never wavered. He joined her sometimes in the kitchen, offering clumsy help with chopping vegetables or carrying wood for the fire, laughing when she scolded him for making a mess. It was in those small moments, more than grand declarations, that Maria began to trust that his love was real, rooted not in her position or duty, but in her very soul, With every passing day, Maria began to see how deeply his presence changed the rhythm of her life. No longer did she feel invisible, hidden behind pots and pans while the world passed her by. Instead, she felt as though she stood at the very center of something greater, her laughter echoing through the halls, her hands no longer just preparing meals, but shaping the warmth of a home. He would often sit at the edge of the kitchen, watching her with a quiet devotion, telling her that the sight of her working was more comforting than any fine painting or polished jewel. At first, she dismissed such words as flattery, but over time she realized they came from a heart that valued her for who she truly was, not what she could provide.
Ah,